At Christmas of 2025, my cousin falsely accused me and my family disowned me. But 10 years later, my family finally reached out after she admitted the truth. I grew up in a quiet suburb in Ohio, the kind of place where the loudest sound most evenings was a lawnmower or kids riding their bikes until the streetlights came on. Our house was a modest split level with beige siding and a porch that always needed repainting. Nothing fancy, but it was home. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and your business was their business, whether you liked it or not. Most mornings I'd wake up to the smell of coffee drifting from the kitchen. My dad already dressed for work in his button-down shirt, tapping the newspaper with his finger as he read the headlines. He worked as an accountant at a firm downtown. Same desk for 15 years, same routine every morning. My mom was a nurse at the county hospital, so she'd often be coming home around the same time I was leaving. Her scrubs wrinkled and her hair tied up in a messy bun. She'd give me a tired smile, ask if I'd eaten breakfast, then head straight to bed. Her shifts were brutal, 12 hours on her feet, dealing with patients who ranged from grateful to hostile. By the time I turned 20, my life was simple but full. I worked part-time at a hardware store off Route 23 while taking classes at the community college nearby. My shift usually started around 2 p.m., which meant I had mornings free. I'd wake up, make myself a bowl of cereal, sometimes toast if I felt ambitious, and ride my bike to campus. The ride took about 15 minutes through neighborhood streets lined with maple trees that turned brilliant red in the fall. Classes weren't anything fancy. Basic English, intro to sociology, business math. The kind of general education stuff everyone has to slog through before picking a major. But I liked the rhythm of having somewhere to go every day. I wasn't the best student, but I showed up, took notes, turned in assignments on time. My professors barely knew my name, which was fine by me. I wasn't there to make an impression. I was there to get the credits and figure out what came next. After class, I'd stop at the coffee shop across the street for a cheap refill before heading to work at the hardware store. The place was called Anderson's Hardware, family-owned for 3 generations, with creaky wooden floors and fluorescent lights that buzzed overhead. I knew every aisle by heart. Paint in aisle 3, plumbing in aisle 7, seasonal stuff near the back. I stocked shelves, cut keys, mixed paint, and helped customers load bags of mulch into their trunks. Some days dragged, especially the slow Tuesday afternoons when I'd spend hours just reorganizing the same display of screws. But there was a satisfaction in walking home with sore arms and dust on my jeans. The kind of tired that came from actual work, not just sitting in a lecture hall. The store manager, a guy named Mike, always joked that I could probably run the place blindfolded. He was in his 50s, balding, with a gut that hung over his belt and a laugh that boomed across the store. He'd clap me on the back whenever I finished a big project, restocking an entire section or helping a difficult customer. I wasn't ambitious back then, but I liked being dependable. I liked knowing that Mike trusted me with keys to the stockroom, with opening the store on weekends, with handling the register when he stepped out for lunch. My evenings were filled with small routines. On Mondays, I met up with a couple of friends to shoot hoops at the local park. We'd play until it got too dark to see the rim, then sit on the bleachers talking about nothing. Work, school, which girls from campus were single, whether we'd ever leave Ohio. The usual stuff guys in their 20s talk about when they're killing time. Fridays, I usually saw my girlfriend Ashley. We'd been together about a year and a half at that point. She worked at a salon, cutting hair and listening to people's problems all day, which meant by the time I picked her up, she just wanted to relax. We'd grab burgers at a diner on the edge of town, the kind with red vinyl booths and a jukebox that still played actual records. Then we'd catch a movie at the $5 theater, an old place with sticky floors and seats that creaked when you sat down. Sometimes we'd drive out to the lake afterward and park by the water, talking until her phone buzzed with texts from her mom asking when she'd be home. Nothing serious, nothing dramatic, just the easy comfort of being with someone who got you. Saturdays were for sleeping in. I'd wake up around noon, make a sandwich, watch whatever game was on TV. Sometimes I'd tinker with my car in the driveway, changing the oil or replacing brake pads. My dad taught me most of what I knew about cars, standing over my shoulder in the garage when I was a teenager, handing me tools and explaining what each part did. Those lessons stuck with me. And Sundays were family days. Without fail. My mom made a big meal. Chili in the fall with cornbread on the side. Roast chicken in the winter with mashed potatoes and gravy. Spaghetti in the summer because it was too hot to turn on the oven for anything else. And my dad would pour sweet tea into mismatched glasses we'd collected over the years from various restaurants and gas stations. My sister would show up with her boyfriend, a guy named Craig, who worked in insurance and talked too much about golf. My cousins often came over, filling the house with chatter, laughter, and the clatter of dishes being passed around the table. I didn't think about it much back then, but those dinners were the anchor of my week. The one constant in a life that otherwise felt like I was just floating from one day to the next. We'd argue over football, Ohio State versus Michigan, whether the Browns would ever win another Super Bowl. We'd tease each other about grades or jobs, about who was gaining weight or losing hair. And we'd play cards after dessert, usually euchre, my dad and I versus my mom and sister, with quarters stacked on the table as stakes. Sometimes I'd help my dad fix something in the garage afterward. A squeaky hinge, a loose shelf, a drawer that stuck. He'd hand me tools and explain what needed to be done, his voice patient and steady. And when we finished, he'd clap me on the shoulder saying, "You've got good hands, kid. You could make a living doing this if you wanted." Looking back, those moments felt permanent, like they'd always be there. Like the Sunday dinners and the garage projects and the sound of my family laughing over cards were things I could count on forever. Life wasn't perfect. I was broke most of the time, stressed about exams, and constantly driving my beat-up Honda to the repair shop. But it was steady, predictable. I had people who showed up for me. I had plans, however small, and the comfort of knowing that when Sunday rolled around there would be a plate of food waiting for me at the family table. I didn't realize how fragile that normalcy was at the time. It felt like something I could always count on, like the rhythm of the seasons or the hum of cicadas in summer. But it only took one lie, one sentence spoken at the wrong moment, to rip it all away. Christmas was always the biggest holiday for my family. Bigger than Thanksgiving, bigger than the 4th of July. It was the one day a year when everyone showed up, no excuses. That year, we gathered at my parents' house like usual. I got there around 10 in the morning to help with setup. The kitchen smelled like honey-glazed ham and roasted potatoes, and every counter was stacked with cookies and trays of food. My mom had been cooking since the night before, her apron dusted with flour, her hands moving constantly between the stove and the cutting board. I spent the morning helping my dad haul folding chairs from the basement and setting up the extra table in the living room. We had to push the couch back against the wall to make space, moving the coffee table into the hallway. My dad complained about his back the whole time, groaning as he lifted each chair. But he was grinning. He loved this. The chaos, the noise, the feeling of the house being full. By noon, the house was packed. My aunt and uncle arrived first, carrying a casserole dish wrapped in aluminum foil. My grandparents came next, my grandpa shuffling slowly with his cane, my grandma fussing over whether the turkey would be dry. My sister showed up with Craig, who immediately started setting up the Christmas tree lights that had gone out. And then came the cousins. A handful of them, ranging in age from teenagers to mid-20s, including Jessica, who was a couple of years younger than me. I'd known her my whole life. We'd grown up together, played tag in the backyard as kids, sat next to each other at holiday dinners. She was family. Nothing more, nothing less. I barely paid attention to her that day, to be honest. She helped my mom in the kitchen for a while, then sat in the living room with the younger cousins watching some holiday movie on cable. The day itself felt normal, comfortable. I carved ham alongside my dad, both of us standing at the counter with carving knives, trying to slice even pieces, while my mom hovered behind us saying, "Not too thick, not too thick." I carried plates of food to the table, making multiple trips from the kitchen to the dining room. And I helped my mom keep the gravy warm on the stove, stirring it occasionally so it wouldn't burn. After dinner, the kids piled into the den to open presents, while the adults lingered over coffee. I could hear them from the kitchen, my uncles talking about who got the best gifts, my grandpa telling some story about Christmas in the 50s that everyone had heard 100 times before. I spent most of the evening stacking dirty dishes, loading the dishwasher, and sneaking Christmas cookies. Sugar cookies first, then gingerbread, then a couple of chocolate chip ones. My mom caught me on the third handful and swatted my hand away, laughing. "You're going to make yourself sick," she said. But she wrapped up a plate of cookies for me to take home anyway. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. It was just another Christmas. Loud, chaotic, full of people I'd known my entire life. By the time everyone left around 9 p.m., I was exhausted. I helped my parents clean up, stuffed leftovers into Tupperware containers, and drove home with a plate of ham and stuffing my mom insisted I take. I went to bed that night thinking about nothing more than whether I had class the next day and if I'd remembered to ask Mike for the holiday weekend off. It never occurred to me that in 2 days, my entire life would fall apart. It wasn't until 2 days later that everything cracked open. I was stocking paint cans at the hardware store when my phone buzzed with a dozen missed calls from my mom. I'd been in the back room organizing inventory, my phone on silent in my pocket, When I finally stepped outside for my break and saw all the notifications, my stomach dropped. Nobody calls that many times unless something bad happened. Someone died. Someone got hurt. That's what I thought as I dialed her back, standing in the parking lot next to the dumpster, my hands already shaking. When she answered, her voice was sharp, almost panicked, the kind of voice that cuts through you before the words even register. She told me that Jessica had said I touched her inappropriately during Christmas. The words came out in a rush, like she'd been holding them in and couldn't contain them anymore. She said Jessica had told her parents. Who'd told mine? Who'd called a family meeting to figure out what to do? Everyone was upset. Everyone was angry. And everyone wanted answers. I stood there in the freezing December air, customers walking past me with shopping carts, my phone still pressed to my ear, unable to form words. I couldn't process what she'd just said. My brain refused to catch up. The world felt like it had tilted sideways, and I was sliding off. My first instinct was to drive straight to Jessica's house, to confront her, to demand she take it back. But when I tried calling, she didn't answer. My texts went unread. I called my dad next. He picked up on the first ring, but his tone was clipped, formal. He said I needed to stay away from family events for the time being, that they needed time to process everything. I told him it wasn't true, that nothing had happened. He didn't respond right away. When he finally spoke, all he said was, "We'll talk later." Then he hung up. The fallout was immediate. By the end of that day, my sister had unfriended me on social media. My aunt left me a voicemail telling me to get help. At work, Mike pulled me into his office and said he'd heard rumors. He didn't say what kind of rumors, but his expression made it clear. He thought it best if I took some time off. By the end of the week, I wasn't on the schedule anymore. Ashley's parents found out next. I don't know how, but word traveled fast in a small town. Within a few days, she showed up at my apartment, tearful but firm, saying she couldn't see me anymore. I tried to explain, tried to tell her that nothing had happened, but she just shook her head and left. That was the last time I saw her. I packed up what little I had and left my parents' house that weekend. I showed up on Saturday morning, my car parked in the driveway next to my dad's truck. The house looked the same as it always had. Same beige siding, same porch that needed repainting, same potted plant by the front door that my mom watered every other day. But walking through that door felt different, like I was trespassing in a place that used to be mine. My dad stood by the door as I hauled boxes to my car, not saying a word. He held the door open, watched me make trip after trip from my old bedroom to the driveway, carrying boxes of clothes and books and random stuff I'd accumulated over 20 years of living there. He didn't offer to help, didn't ask where I was going, just stood there with his arms crossed, jaw tight, eyes fixed on some point past my shoulder. I wanted to say something, wanted to defend myself one more time, but the words wouldn't come. What was the point? He'd already made up his mind. My mom tried to hug me before I left. She came out onto the porch as I was loading the last box, her eyes red like she'd been crying. She reached out, started to wrap her arms around me, then pulled back halfway, like she wasn't sure if she should, like touching me might contaminate her. I stood there frozen, my arms at my sides, watching her wrestle with whether to hug her own son. In the end, she just squeezed my shoulder and said, "Take care of yourself." That was it. No, I love you. No, we'll figure this out. Just a pat on the shoulder and a generic send-off you'd give to a neighbor moving across town. Nobody asked me for an explanation. Nobody gave me the chance to defend myself. Nobody sat me down and said, "Tell us your side." They just let me go. Like I was a problem they were relieved to be rid of. I drove away from that house with everything I owned stuffed into the back seat of my Honda, watching it shrink in the rearview mirror until it disappeared around a corner. And that was that. 20 years of my life, erased in a single weekend. I found a cheap one-bedroom apartment near the interstate, the kind of place where the hallway carpet smelled like cigarettes and the laundry room lights flickered. I bought a mattress off Craigslist and set it on the floor. Most of my belongings fit into 2 boxes. Clothes, a few books, some dishes. The first night there, I sat on the mattress surrounded by half-empty boxes, scrolling through my phone. Texts I sent to my family stayed unread. My calls to Jessica went straight to voicemail. The silence was worse than yelling would have been. It was like I'd been erased from their lives in a matter of days. At work, I never got my hours back. Mike stopped returning my calls. By January, I was picking up night shifts at a gas station to pay rent. I'd stand behind the counter under buzzing fluorescent lights, watching strangers shuffle in and out, wondering how my entire world had collapsed so fast. All it had taken was one sentence from Jessica, and my family believed her instantly. Life in that apartment quickly shrank into a pattern of survival. The walls were thin enough that I could hear the couple next door arguing into the night. their voices muffled but sharp. My mornings blurred into afternoons. Most days I didn't bother setting an alarm. By the time I dragged myself out of bed, the sun was already low. I'd pull on the same hoodie, microwave leftover noodles, and head out for another night shift at the gas station. The gas station sat on the corner of a busy intersection, its neon sign buzzing constantly. I worked from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., a shift nobody else wanted. I stocked coolers, mopped sticky floors, and rang up customers who barely looked me in the eye. The regulars were a mix of truckers, insomniacs, and college kids stumbling in for cigarettes and energy drinks. Some nights I'd step outside to empty trash cans and just stare at the endless line of headlights down the highway, wondering how many of those people had homes to return to, families waiting for them. I didn't have that anymore. I had a mattress on the floor and a phone full of unanswered messages. Money was tight. My paycheck barely covered rent and groceries. I stopped going out with friends because I couldn't afford it. And one by one, they stopped calling. Ashley blocked me on everything. My car broke down twice that winter. When I couldn't pay for the repairs, I sold it for scrap and started walking to work. 2 miles each way. In the snow. In the dark. Food became whatever I could grab cheap. Canned soup, frozen pizza, discount cereal. I kept the heat turned down to save money, sleeping under 3 blankets and wearing 2 hoodies to bed. The apartment itself felt less like a home and more like a bunker. I taped up blankets over the windows to block out the streetlights and left dishes to pile in the sink until there weren't any clean ones left. Laundry stacked in the corner until I wore the same clothes for days. The only sounds inside were the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional rattle of the heating pipes. Sometimes when the silence got too heavy, I'd walk down to the 24-hour diner 2 blocks away. I'd sit in a booth with a bottomless cup of coffee, pretending to read a newspaper while watching families and couples come and go. The waitresses learned my name and stopped asking if I wanted dessert. I never did. I just sat there, nursing lukewarm coffee, watching people laugh and talk like their lives were normal, like they hadn't lost everything in a single phone call. Holidays passed unnoticed. On New Year's Eve, I worked the gas station shift while snow fell outside. Customers came in wearing scarves, buying champagne and party supplies, talking about celebrations and resolutions. I sold them gasoline and snacks, then went back to sweeping salt from the floor. At midnight, I clocked out and trudged home through the snow. Alone. New Year's came and went. Then Valentine's Day. Then Easter. Every week bled into the next. Wake up late, walk to work, clean, stock, ring up customers, walk home, eat something from a can, sleep. There was no space for hope or plans. Just the routine and the weight of being cut off from the life I used to know. For nearly 3 years, that was all there was. The turning point came almost by accident. One morning after another long shift at the gas station, I saw a flyer taped to the bus stop. Warehouse hiring. Full-time. Benefits after 90 days. Apply within. On a whim, I rode the bus across town and filled out the application. The place was massive. A distribution center that handled shipments for half the state. Forklifts zipping around, pallets stacked 3 stories high, the constant beep of scanners and hum of conveyor belts. I didn't expect anything to come of it. I'd applied to dozens of places over the years and never heard back. But a week later, I got a call. They wanted me to start Monday. I showed up at 6 a.m. that first day, standing on a loading dock with a dozen other new hires. Steel-toed boots on my feet, a neon vest strapped across my chest, a clipboard in my hand with safety protocols I barely understood. The supervisor, a guy named Tom with forearms like tree trunks, walked us through the basics. How to operate a pallet jack, where to clock in and out, which zones were off limits, what to do if you saw a spill. Then he sent us to our stations and told us to get to work. The work was brutal at first. 12-hour shifts, moving pallets that weighed hundreds of pounds, operating forklifts that required precision I didn't have yet, hauling boxes heavy enough to leave my arms trembling. I'd load trucks until my back screamed, unload shipments until my legs gave out, sort packages until my hands cramped. The first week I could barely move by the time I got home. I'd peel off my boots, collapse onto my mattress, and pass out fully clothed. But for the first time in years, I felt my body working towards something. I came home bone-tired, collapsing onto my mattress without needing anything to knock me out. The exhaustion did it for me. The steady paychecks meant I could finally afford groceries that weren't just frozen pizza. I started buying chicken, vegetables, rice in bulk, even a cheap rice cooker from the thrift store. Cooking simple meals filled my evenings with a purpose I hadn't felt in a long time. It was small, but it mattered. I was feeding myself real food, taking care of myself, planning meals, grocery shopping with a list, cooking enough to have leftovers for the next day. That hadn't happened in years. At the gas station, I'd just grabbed whatever was quick and cheap, but now I had energy to cook, a reason to eat something other than soup from a can. With money coming in, I bought a secondhand bike from a yard sale. 20 bucks for a rusty mountain bike with flat tires. I spent another 10 at the bike shop getting it tuned up, replaced the tires, oiled the chain. And then I started riding it to work. At first, it was just a way to save on bus fare. $3 a day added up over a month. But soon I found myself pedaling further after shifts, exploring side streets I'd never noticed before, sweating through my hoodie as the sun lit the horizon, feeling my lungs burn as I climbed hills I used to drive past. The rhythm of pedaling became its own kind of therapy. My legs burned, my lungs ached, but my mind went quiet. And for the first time since the accusation, I felt something close to peace. Around that time, I met a stray cat that lingered near the dumpsters behind my apartment building. She was a scrappy gray thing with a torn ear, one eye that looked cloudy like she'd been in a fight, and ribs you could count through her matted fur. Skinny but stubborn. She'd hiss if you got too close. But she never ran. At first, I just left scraps of chicken outside the door. Leftovers from dinner, bits of canned tuna, whatever I had. Within a week, she was waiting on my steps every evening when I came home, sitting there like she owned the place, tail wrapped around her paws, watching me with those mismatched eyes. Eventually, I brought her inside. Bought a litter box at the dollar store, a bag of cat food, a cheap plastic bowl for water. I named her Shadow because she followed me everywhere, padding after me from room to room, curling up wherever I sat. For the first time in years, I had something waiting for me at home, a living thing that depended on me. Feeding her, brushing her fur with an old hairbrush I found under the sink, watching her curl up on the blanket at the foot of my bed. It gave me a routine that wasn't just about survival. It was about caring for something. And in a weird way, it made me start caring about myself again. I also started writing. Not big, dramatic things. Just a notebook I picked up at the grocery store. Blue cover with lines inside. 70 pages for $1.50. I'd sit at the kitchen table after dinner and jot down what I did each day. What I ate, what I saw on the bike ride home, conversations I'd had at work, things Shadow did that made me laugh. Filling pages became addictive. Some nights I'd sit there with a pen scratching across paper until my hands cramped, until I'd filled 5 or 6 pages without realizing how much time had passed. It wasn't therapy exactly, but it gave me a sense of control. Like I was documenting proof that I existed, that my life was moving forward, even if nobody else knew or cared. Over time, I cleaned up my act, stopped letting dishes pile up in the sink, started doing laundry every Sunday instead of waiting until I ran out of clean clothes, vacuumed the carpet once a week, scrubbed the bathroom, kept the kitchen counter clear. My apartment was still small and dingy, the wallpaper peeling in the corners, the carpet stained from previous tenants, the heating still unreliable. But I bought a proper bed frame from a thrift store, a small desk where I could sit and write, and a bookshelf that I stacked with library books I'd check out and actually read. I kept the dishes clean, the trash taken out, the floors swept. For the first time since the accusation, my space felt like a home. There were still nights when I thought about the past, when memories of family dinners or Ashley's laugh made my chest ache, when I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling wondering what my life would have been like if Jessica had never lied. But more often than not, I focused on the present. The feel of Shadow's fur under my hand, the steam rising from a pot of rice, the rhythm of pedaling down an empty street before sunrise, the satisfaction of a paycheck that covered my bills with money left over. Small things, normal things, things I'd taken for granted at 20, but now felt like luxuries. I didn't realize it then, but I was learning how to live again. By the time 3 years had passed, I'd built something small but solid. A job that paid the bills. A routine that kept me grounded. A cat that waited for me at the door. It wasn't the life I'd imagined at 20, but it was mine. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could handle whatever came next. I was wrong. It happened on a Wednesday evening, just as I was finishing a late shift at the warehouse. I was in the break room, pulling off my gloves and unlacing my boots, when my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. Normally, I would have ignored it, but something made me swipe to answer. "Hello," I said. There was a pause. Then a voice I hadn't heard in nearly a decade. My mother. She spoke softly, almost cautiously, asking if it was really me. My throat went dry. I hadn't heard her voice since the day I carried boxes out of their house. Her arms half raised like she wanted to hug me but couldn't. Now she was calling me as if no time had passed. I listened as she stumbled through the words. My cousin Jessica had confessed at a family gathering. She'd broken down and admitted that she had lied all those years ago. No incident had ever happened. She said she'd been jealous, angry, and in a moment of spite, had told the story that destroyed me. My mother's voice cracked as she explained. Jessica had been going through something back then, some personal issue she never told anyone about, and for reasons nobody fully understood, she'd decided to take it out on me. She'd made up the story, stuck to it for years, and let me take the fall. And now, after almost a decade, she'd finally admitted the truth. I didn't say much on the phone. My mother filled the silence, telling me how sorry she was, how much they regretted not standing by me, how they should have listened, should have believed me. She asked if we could meet, if we could start fresh. I ended the call with a flat, "I'll think about it," and put the phone back in my pocket. My hands shook as I packed my gear bag and walked out into the night air. I rode my bike home in a daze, the streetlights blurring past me. When I got to my apartment, Shadow greeted me at the door, purring and rubbing against my legs. I fed her, then sat at the kitchen table, staring at the wall. The next few days blurred together, but the ripple effects were immediate. My sister sent me a long text apologizing and begging me to call. My father left a voicemail, his voice steady but cracked around the edges, asking me to come by for dinner. Even my aunt reached out on social media, saying she was ashamed of how things had gone. At work, I found myself moving slower, distracted. I dropped boxes, forgot to log shipments. My boss noticed, asked if everything was okay. I just shrugged and said I was tired. At home, Shadow patted across my lap as I sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through the messages. Part of me wanted to delete them all and keep my life as it was. Quiet, steady, mine. Another part of me wanted to answer, to see their faces again, to sit at a dinner table that had once felt like the center of my world. But I didn't rush to decide. Instead, I stuck to my routines. I biked to work, cooked meals, wrote in my journal. But the past had forced its way back in, no matter how much I tried to keep it at bay. Every time my phone buzzed, my chest tightened. Every time I passed the old neighborhood on my bike, I found myself slowing down, looking at the houses, wondering if any of those people knew what had happened, if they remembered the kid who got accused and cut off, if they cared. One night, I walked past the diner I used to haunt during my lowest years. Through the window, I saw a family crowded into a booth, laughing over plates of fries. I froze on the sidewalk, realizing how long it had been since I'd had that kind of belonging. For the first time in years, the idea of going back didn't feel impossible, but it didn't feel safe either. A week after the first call, I found an envelope slipped under my apartment door. Inside was a handwritten letter from my parents. My dad's blocky handwriting filled the first page. My mom's cursive filled the second. They said they wanted me home for Sunday dinner, just like before. My mom listed the menu. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, pie. Like she thought the familiar details might bridge 10 lost years. She wrote about my sister's kids, about how they'd love to meet me, about how much had changed and how much they'd missed. My dad's letter was shorter. He said he was sorry, that he should have believed me, that he wanted another chance to be my father. I sat with the letter on the table and left it there for days. Every time I walked past, Shadow would paw at the corner, as if she sensed my hesitation. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to crumple it up and throw it away, to keep living the life I'd built without them. But another part of me, the part that still remembered Sunday dinners and my dad's hand on my shoulder, wanted to try. The following Saturday, I got in my car. I'd saved up enough to buy a used sedan a few months back. Nothing fancy, but it ran. I told myself I was just going for groceries, but the road took me past my old neighborhood, past my parents' house. Almost the same. Beige siding, porch light glowing, a wreath on the door. A couple of new cars sat in the driveway. For 20 minutes, I circled the block, slowing down each time I passed. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight, my knuckles ached. Finally, I pulled into a gas station and sat there, staring at the pump until the sun dipped below the rooftops. Then I turned the car around and drove home. The messages didn't stop. My sister texted pictures of her kids I'd never met. My aunt sent an invite to a family barbecue. Even my cousin Jessica wrote me an email. Short, shaky sentences with apologies, saying she didn't expect forgiveness but wanted me to know she was in therapy and trying to change. I read it once, then deleted it without answering. Meanwhile, my routines kept me grounded. I woke early, biked to the warehouse, cooked dinner, wrote in my journal. But everything felt heavier now, like every action carried a question mark. Was I building a future, or just running from the past? One evening, I laid out clean clothes on my bed, planning to drive back for that Sunday dinner. Shadow sat on the folded shirt, staring at me with unblinking eyes. I stood there for a long time, torn between picking her up and heading out the door or putting everything back in the drawer and staying where I was. In the end, I didn't do either. I left the clothes there, untouched, and sat at the desk instead, writing down everything I'd done that day. Woke up, rode bike, unloaded truck, cooked rice, fed shadow. Normal, safe actions. But my hands shook as I wrote because I knew the decision was waiting. For now, I'll keep waking up, keep biking to work, keep feeding shadow, keep writing in my journal, keep living my life the way I've learned to live it. And when the time comes to make a decision, I'll make it. But not today. Today, I'm just going to finish this cup of coffee, close my journal, and go to bed. Tomorrow, I'll do it all over again. And the day after that, and the day after that, until I figure out what I want, until I'm ready, until the anger fades enough to see clearly. And maybe one day, I'll walk through that door. Or maybe I won't. But either way, I'll be okay. Because I've already done the hardest part. I survived. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel and help us bring you more and better stories. Thanks.